Hi, this is Anthony. Welcome back to the show. If you're already a subscriber, you know that I discuss a wide range of topics, and quite frankly, I'd love to sit at home and make videos all day long talking about everything under the sun, although that's not practical. If you're not a subscriber, why don't you take a second and hit that subscribe button? It doesn't cost you anything, and it just takes a second. Thanks so much. So, a lot of my content looks at unsolved mysteries like the D.B. Cooper case and the Zodiac Killer from California. I also talk about stock investing and personal finance, collecting old things like coins and banknotes, and a wide variety of other things. And a topic that I've turned to and done a couple of videos on recently is in alignment with my YouTube channels that I watch, particularly ones produced by former Mormons and former Scientologists. I think that their stories are quite interesting, but also based on my academic background. I find the stories and information about those churches' management structures, historical development, and the compiling of their sacred writings to be very interesting. And those videos get a good number of views because there's a lot of people out there interested in the post-Mormon and post-Scientology experience. But today, let's do a thought experiment. And if you're not at least a little bit open-minded, then you're probably not going to want to do this, but you're probably not watching my video anyway. But let us assume a couple things. And we're going to assume this for the video. We're not agreeing that they are in fact true. Let us assume that Jesus was a historical figure, either a man anointed as the Messiah or part of a Trinitarian God. And let us assume that he came back today, which happens to be a Sunday. And he comes back without any great fanfare. It may or may not be to usher in a rapture, but he just shows up and he walks into a church operated by what is often referred to as a high-demand religion. This can be a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or Jehovah Witness Kingdom Hall. If Jesus just walked in off the street with perhaps long hair and a beard, not wearing a suit, how would he feel in the church? I think that many people who study churches would agree that the higher the demand of the religion upon the daily lives of the congregants, the more that particular denomination pushes the concept of them being the one true church, that they are the restoration of what God and or Jesus intended. But just as I argue, when you're looking at unsolved mysteries, you have to look at each piece of evidence and ask yourself, is this really evidence tied to the crime? And if so, has it been contaminated by people who have handled it perhaps for the past 50 years? Are there fingerprints or DNA on it now? Is there an unbroken chain of custody that everyone agrees upon? And even if one can agree on what the clues are, the interpretation is what can divide researchers on these historical mysteries. So too are religions divided into various sects and denominations. And generally that's because people within a group interpret something about their belief system to be different than the dominant belief, and so they leave and create a new church. That's why some Christians can't agree on whether Jesus is part of a trinity or a man anointed to be the Messiah, or whether grape juice or wine or water should be given out in communion, or should the local language be used as the liturgical language, or should it be an old church Slavonic or Latin, and what version of the Bible should be used. Does it matter, or does it need to be the King James Version of 1611? So many things, both significant and insignificant, have divided Christian churches for the past 2,000 years. And of course, Judaism and Islam and Buddhism have different schools of thought within them on what is the one true way to practice those religions or belief systems. The LDS Church, for instance, as we all know, prohibits the consumption of alcohol, nicotine, and caffeine. And certainly for a healthy lifestyle, those are probably some good things to avoid as much as possible. But quite clearly in the Bible, Jesus is turning water into wine and seems to be drinking wine at the Last Supper. So why is the moderate consumption of wine prohibited? And the Mormons aren't the only ones. There's lots of Baptists who may not officially within their church oppose wine, but on a societal level have supported prohibition in the past. So what do you think Jesus would say about that? If he didn't want people drinking a sip of wine in commemoration of him, then why didn't he just clearly say, I want everyone drinking tap water out of Dixie cups to be in communion with me? Jesus spoke about selling all your possessions and giving your money to the poor, and he overturned the tables of the money changers. What would he think of churches that have hundreds of millions or perhaps billions of dollars in investment accounts in real estate, particularly churches that don't necessarily contribute much money to needy causes. I think if your church argues that they're saving up all this money so that there's money to buy necessary items during the rapture, then perhaps it's not being used for its best purpose at this time. And think about this. Let's say that you believe in a monotheistic God who created the entire universe, and perhaps it was done in 6 literal days, or perhaps it was done in a much longer period. But let's assume that the universe was created by a God. Everything out there, perhaps millions of galaxies, countless stars, exotic planets, everything on Earth, with all the wonders that we see and that are unseen. But all of a sudden now, to operate as churches, followers need to donate 10% of their money. Even if the followers are poor and barely scraping by, they have to donate 10% of their gross income. It just seems like if God could create all that universe, that he could somehow magically create enough donations to operate the church and keep the lights on. And what does it really take to operate a church? Enough to keep the lights on and the water running and the garbage hauled away and buying some hymnals and candles. For a lot of churches, that's kind of what they're spending money on, and perhaps paying a mortgage and hopefully running charitable activities. But what about churches where you have pastors flying around the world on jets paid for by their parishioners' money? What would Jesus think about that? Is there any part of the New Testament where Jesus or God is saying that they need jet planes in the future to spread the good word? 2,000 years ago in the Holy Land, your options for land travel were probably walking or riding a donkey or a camel, or if you were lucky, perhaps a chariot pulled by a horse. Anything in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John about congregations paying money so that the leader of their church can ride in a golden chariot rather than on the back of a donkey? Today there's over 8 billion people in the world, and many of them believe in some type of religious conception, and many people don't believe in any supernatural or spiritual phenomenon. Now, obviously, they can't all be right, but what we as humans have to do is look at our beliefs and assumptions about the world around us and continually ask ourselves, is what I believe in true? Is it a fact? Where do I get this information from? From a church leader? From a book? Just because somebody that you respect says something, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily true. They could be lying, even if it's to try to get you to be a better person or to get to a better place. Or they could just be making an honest mistake. And of course, they could be sincere in what they're saying, but again, just because somebody is sincere in their beliefs doesn't mean that those beliefs are factually correct. I think that it's human nature to believe things that have been put down in printed form. That seems to lend an aura of credibility. And often the longer that it's been in print, or at least in circulation, the more that people put faith into its veracity. Some believing Christians may say, I believe in the Bible because it's 2,000 or more years old, but I don't believe in what Mormons believe because their book is only 200 years old. But Mormons would argue that is another testament, that it's basically been communicated word for word from God to Joseph Smith 200 years ago, so has not been corrupted over the centuries as many people argue that the books of the New Testament have been. But I think that we all know that books can be fiction. Books can have errors and inaccuracies or even lies, even when they're being promoted as truthful. While I have nothing against novels, I read very little fiction. There's just so many nonfiction books to read at this time. But it seems like every time I read a book, I find inaccuracies in it. Not just proofreading misses, but errors about currency or things like that to the casual reader are not readily apparent as an inaccuracy, but something which editors should have double-checked before publishing the book. Again, I like to get back to unsolved mysteries. I always argue, look at things critically. Not critically in a negative sense, but critically in a sense that you critique each link in a chain. If there's a theory or a solution where piece by piece things seem to fit together, but one piece is missing and can't be substantiated, or one piece actually contradicts the rest of the narrative, then you need to be extremely careful in making or accepting conclusions about the case at hand. And that goes the same for politics. I don't really want to discuss politics in this video because that's a whole other can of worms. But my degrees were in political science, so it's a passing interest to me. And it's so interesting to hear people talk about their political beliefs and their strong identification with one of the two main parties in the United States, and often how they disagree with the components of the platform of the party that they support, not realizing that because they only look at one or two topics, such as abortion or health care or gun rights. But they get so whipped up and angry about people who oppose whatever their pet topics are that it seems to divide people more and more. Although there has always been divisions in American politics, and often the divisions were based on what we consider to be quite silly these days. But that's another video for another day. I'm going to wrap up here. The whole point of this video is just to stimulate personal thought about what it is that a person sees as real and how they go about living their life based on those realities that they perceive, and how that line of thinking can translate into looking at all aspects of life, as well as interpreting things like unsolved mysteries. Again, I'd love to hear from you. Please do leave a comment, even if you totally disagree with me. Do hit that subscribe button. I need to get less than 200 subscribers to go before I get monetized. And I hope that you'll check out my other videos. If you like them, or even if you don't, hit the like button. Thanks again, and I hope to hear from you soon.